Hey guys, welcome to my decision-making presentation for the assessment, the personality assessment that we did for this module. Hope you are all doing well. Just some quick follow-ups to the About Me from the other presentation. Fall is my favorite season, specifically here in the Pacific Northwest. It's just always unbelievable. My go-to drink at Starbucks is a vanilla sweet cream cold brew with 1 pump of white mocha. And then once I get my degree, I hope to enter into nonprofit management of some sort or public safety communication. And then the Human Rights Campaign was actually the national nonprofit that I did an internship for that I mentioned in the previous presentation. That was several years ago, but definitely every June I reflect back on a lot of my time there, it being Pride Month and all. So the personality assessment that we did for this assignment defined me as a protagonist. So the three sort of tenets of this protagonist as described by the assessment are charisma, empathy, and idealism, all of which I think do sort of embody myself, but we'll get into that on the next slide. So the assessment describes having this type of charisma as being beneficial in maintaining and sustaining really deeper level relationships, both in the workplace and just in life in general. And then also being a naturally, empathetic person allows me to, establish those deeper level relationships, but then also leaves me vulnerable to, being too empathetic and sort of losing the things that I need to maintain myself and focus on for my own mental health. And then the idealism found in a protagonist like myself can also be shown through, um, their innate sort of ability to rally a team, center around a goal, really drive people towards those results or common goal. A side effect of some of that leadership, I think, can also be, not necessarily being ready for conflicts or criticism that arise, and really feeling like, whoa, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, or really having trouble adjusting to the sort of idealistic goal that someone like myself may have entered the situation with. So I do definitely agree with the results. One of the biggest things that I took away from the results was just the re-emphasis on how empathy can be an amazing asset in a lot of ways, but also potentially one of my biggest downfalls. And I thought about several years ago when I worked at Target and we had cashiers and team members that were required to meet certain metrics in terms of selling credit and debit cards, and we would really have to push that and get on them for why they weren't or were, meeting their quota. And I always had, empathy for those that were struggling because I would always think that I would probably be in a similar situation if I was in their role, not feeling like I'm a natural salesperson or the person that's just has a natural sort of, get this and it'll be great for you and that kind of thing. So I always had empathy for people in those roles as a supervisor. And then at my current workplace, I thought of how oftentimes, especially in the beginning of my career at Starbucks, it was really difficult for me to delegate because I always wanted to sort of have my hands on everything, knowing that, it would be completed the right way. And it's only been through the mentorship of another manager where I've come to realize that if I delegate a task to another supervisor, it doesn't mean that I'm any less of a supervisor or any less competent. It just simply means that I'm able to, um, you know, in tandem sort of hold my own work standard together, but also allow other people to help in the process of making sure that the store runs efficiently day to day. So in the previous presentation, I talked a little bit about how Starbucks in the morning, we have these out the window metrics that we aim to meet. And in relation to Chapter 9, I thought a little bit about how when I am not a present supervisorial sort of force on the floor, I think elements of groupthink have a tendency to make their way into the team. So, for example, if there are adjustments that I'm not making or updates that I'm not giving to them, I think there's a little bit of a tendency for the team to sort of adopt a mentality of, well, this is fine, or we don't need anything to change because I made the plan, I positioned everyone, and if I'm not changing it, then, why should they feel the need to do so? So I thought that groupthink correlated a little bit to what can happen in my workplace when I am not fulfilling my, detailed roles as a supervisor. So several years ago, I worked at Starbucks with a manager who had a very different personality from mine. She was much more, I would say, by the book and standard, and really wasn't an uncompassionate person, but didn't necessarily lead with empathy, and was much more just goal driven and operationally focused. And so sometimes our personalities would clash when we would have to work directly together to make decisions. And so I think when we sort of tried to follow like the Dewey model, for example, of decision making being sort of rigid and a little bit more strict, we would run into problems. And so I think us using a little bit more of the vigilant interaction theory approach would have allowed us to sort of see that we can collaborate together. The journey might not be as sort of linear as other models, but because our personalities were so different, we may have needed to rely on something like VIT to help us get to the decision. And I think the biggest question that gets outlined in the text that we should have focused on in using this approach would have been, what do we want to achieve or accomplish in addressing this problem? Really nailing that down before we get into some of the other nitty-gritty details, I think would have helped us in that situation. Being two individuals who were working together in decision making but didn't have a ton in common in terms of personality. So one of the biggest takeaways from this assessment is that I am on the right path in terms of pursuing a communication degree, just given my personality and things that really are important to me and things that I want to bring to organizations and to the world. Reinforcing that empathy is great, but can also be a little bit of a detriment when not managed correctly. And then also just reinforced to me that, my desire and passion to bring positive things to other people into the world is something to keep with me and not lose focus of, but also be open to criticism and be open to maybe different ways of doing things. And then a quote that I found that I think really embodies myself and just my goals for the future is the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others, from Mahatma Gandhi. And I think that that really sums up my goals for the future. And I appreciate you watching my presentation again. Take care.